Imagine standing in front of a vast canvas where color itself becomes the language, where form dissolves into feeling, and where the quiet power of simplicity ever could. Because today, we're not just talking about painting. We're stepping into the immersive, meditative, and often misunderstood world of color-field painting, a form of abstract art that strips away the noise and asks a daring question right from the start. What happens when color alone carries the weight of emotion, memory, and meaning? And if you've ever looked at a seemingly simple canvas filled with large expanses of color and thought, "I don't get it," then stay with me. Because by the end of this journey, you might not only understand it, you might feel it in a way that changes how you see it. Because color-field painting isn't about what you see at first glance. It's about what unfolds slowly, almost imperceptibly, as you allow yourself to sit with it, to breathe with it, to let it work on you in silence. And that's exactly where we begin, with the idea that less can be infinitely more, that a single hue stretched across a surface can carry a depth of emotion that no detailed image could ever replicate. And as an abstract artist, I can tell you that the process is both deceptively simple and profoundly complex. Because when you remove recognizable forms, you remove the crutches. There's nowhere to hide. Every choice becomes intentional. Every edge, every gradient, every subtle shift in tone becomes a voice speaking directly to the viewer's subconscious. And that's where the magic lives, not in the explanation, but in the experience. So as we explore this together, I want you to imagine not just watching a painting being made, but feeling it come into existence as layers of color are applied, sometimes gently washed across the canvas, sometimes soaked in, sometimes allowed to bleed and merge in ways that feel almost organic, like watching clouds form or dissolve. And there's a kind of surrender in that process, a willingness to let the material speak, to let the paint behave in ways that aren't entirely controlled. Because color-field painting isn't about precision in the traditional sense. It's about resonance, about creating a space where the viewer can project their own emotions, their own memories, their own interpretations. And that's why these paintings often feel so personal, even though they don't depict anything specific, because they act as mirrors rather than windows, reflecting something internal rather than showing something external. And if you think about it, that's a radical shift in how art functions. It moves away from storytelling in the literal sense and becomes something closer to a shared emotional atmosphere. And that's why scale matters so much in this style. Because when a painting is large enough to fill your field of vision, it stops being an object and starts becoming an environment, something you step into rather than simply observe. And that's the hook that pulls so many people in once they give it a chance. That moment when you realize you're not just looking at color, you're being surrounded by it, held within it. And suddenly, those subtle variations start to feel like movement, like breath, like something alive. And as an artist working in this space, the challenge is to create that sense of presence without relying on traditional composition, without using figures or perspective or narrative cues, instead relying entirely on the relationships between colors, on how they interact, how they vibrate against each other, how they create tension or harmony. And this is where understanding color becomes essential, not just in a technical sense, but in an emotional one, because different hues carry different psychological weights. A deep, saturated red can feel intense, even overwhelming, while a soft, diffused blue can feel calming, expansive, almost infinite. And when you place these colors together, you're essentially composing a kind of visual music, where each tone contributes to an overall mood. And just like in music, sometimes the most powerful moments come from restraint, from allowing space, from letting a single note linger long enough to be fully felt. And that's something that takes time to learn. Because in a world that often celebrates complexity and detail, choosing simplicity can feel counterintuitive, even risky. But that risk is what gives color-field painting its unique power, because it demands engagement. It asks the viewer to slow down, to be present, to move beyond the initial reaction and into a deeper level of perception. And as you watch this painting come together, I want you to notice not just the colors themselves, but how they evolve, how the edges soften or sharpen, how layers build upon each other to create depth without traditional dimension. And this layering process is crucial, because even though the final result might appear minimal, it often contains multiple layers beneath the surface, each contributing to the overall effect in subtle ways, like echoes that you can't quite see but can somehow feel. And that's part of what makes this style so captivating, that sense that there's more happening than meets the eye, that the simplicity is actually a kind of distilled complexity. And as an artist, there's a balance to strike between intention and intuition, between planning and spontaneity, because while you might start with a general idea of the color palette or the mood you want to create, the process itself often leads you in unexpected directions. And being open to that is essential, because some of the most compelling moments in a painting come from those unplanned interactions, those happy accidents that reveal something you couldn't have predicted. And learning to recognize and preserve those moments is part of the craft, part of developing an eye not just for what you intended to do, but for what the painting itself is becoming. And that's something that evolves over time, as you build a relationship with your materials, with your own instincts, with the subtle cues that tell you when something is working and when it isn't. And that sensitivity is what ultimately allows you to create work that resonates. Because at the end of the day, color field painting isn't about impressing people with technical skill. It's about creating an experience, about offering something that invites contemplation, that encourages a kind of quiet engagement that's increasingly rare in a fast-paced, image-saturated world. And that's why this form of art continues to be relevant, even decades after its emergence. Because it speaks to something fundamental, something that goes beyond trends or styles, something that taps into the way we perceive and respond to color on a deeply human level. And as you continue watching, I want you to let go of the need to understand it in a logical way, to instead focus on how it makes you feel, because that's where the true value lies, not in being able to explain it, but in being able to experience it, to allow yourself to be affected by it, even if you can't quite articulate why. And maybe that's the most important takeaway from all of this, that art doesn't always need to be decoded or analyzed to be meaningful. Sometimes it just needs to be felt. And color field painting, in its quiet, unassuming way, offers exactly that. A space where feeling takes precedence over form, where simplicity opens the door to depth, and where a single field of color can become an entire world if you're willing to step into it.